Back in 2009, in Chongqing, China, there was a 13-year-old boy named Kwang Zhijun. He was found hanged from a beam in his family's home in an incredibly bizarre and eerie way. He was wearing a bright red dress, and underneath that red dress, he had on a women's one-piece swimsuit. Inside the swimsuit, 2 clumps of black cloth were stuffed to mimic a woman's chest. There was a pinhole on his forehead, and a weight about 2 pounds was tied to his feet. The way he died was just downright strange. The first person to find Kwang's body was none other than his own father. This poor man, 54 years old at the time, was an honest, hard-working farmer from rural Chongqing. He and his wife spent most of the year working in the city, only returning to their rural hometown for a few days during the Chinese New Year. Their son had just started junior high that year and usually lived at school from Monday to Friday. On weekends, he would go stay with his parents for a couple of days. That's how it had been for years. So Kwang had learned to be pretty independent early on. Kwang Zhijun's parents were pretty laid back about him. They just gave him his weekly allowance and didn't meddle much in his life. Then one day, as the weekend was winding down and he was about to head back to school, he told his dad he wouldn't be coming over the next weekend. He said he wanted to spend a couple of days back at their old family home, which had been sitting empty for a while. He mentioned he wanted to cut down the overgrown weeds and clean the place up. His parents thought it was pretty reasonable of him and happily agreed, even tossing him enough allowance for 2 weeks. About 2 weeks had passed, and Kwang's father figured his son's living expenses were probably running low, so he thought he would give him a call to check in, see when he was coming back the next week. But no matter how many times he dialed, his son's phone just would not go through. Starting to get a bad feeling, he called the school instead. The school's response threw him off balance. "Your son has not been here since last Friday when the holiday started. It has been almost a week since he last showed up. We have been trying to reach you for days, but your phone has been dead every time." Hearing this, Kwang's father just shook his head over the phone. It turned out his phone had broken down a few days earlier. What terrible luck, right? If it had not, he would have picked up the school's calls without a problem. Now, Kwang was not some top student or anything, but he had never skipped the class before. So what was going on this time? The more his father thought about it, the more uneasy he became. He decided to head back to their old family home himself, thinking maybe the kid was just hiding out there playing video games or something. It was around noon on November 5th, 2009, when he arrived about 12 o'clock. As soon as he got there, something felt wrong. Their old house had a front door and this very hidden back door that hardly anyone ever used. I mean, it was basically never opened, sealed shut with 2 big wooden planks and a thick steel bar wedged against it. For all intents and purposes, that back door was useless. But when Kwang's father got there, the front door was locked tight and the back door, it swung open with a light push. The planks and steel bar were just lying on the ground inside, one on each side. Then he looked up, and what he saw next would haunt him for the rest of his life. There was his son, Kwang Zhijun, hanging from the beam in a red dress, his body already stiff and cold. The room was a mess, clothes and random items scattered all over the floor. On the table, there were 2 packs of instant noodles, one eaten, one still unopened. The bed was a jumble of the kid's school books, his backpack, a calculator, his phone, a watch, and a bit of leftover living money that had not been spent yet. Word of Kwang's strange death spread quickly through the village. One of the older folks who was part of the crowd back then said nobody dared touch the kid's body at first. It was him, this old man, who finally worked up the courage to take the boy down from the beam. After they got him down, the coroner showed up that same night and did the autopsy right there in the old house. The old man still remembers it clearly. After they cut him open, they sewed him back up with 7 stitches from his chest down to his stomach. The coroner's report said there were no obvious injuries on the body, and he had been dead for less than 48 hours. Kwang Zhijun's parents were absolutely heartbroken. How could their perfectly healthy child just be gone like that? Who could have done this and why? The older couple pinned all their hopes on the police, counting the days as they waited for the investigation results. But after a grueling month of waiting, all they got was a notice saying the case wouldn't be pursued. The police said that after their investigation, they found no signs of anyone breaking into the scene, and there were no suspicious fatal injuries on the body. But Kwang was wearing women's clothes, a red dress and a swimsuit, with candle wax strips and his own semen on the swimsuit. Putting all this together, they figured it pointed to Kwang having a thing for cross-dressing and SM tendencies. Thing is, this kind of behavior can easily spiral out of control and end up killing you by accident. Stuff like this happens all the time with young people. It is not even news anymore. Based on that hunch, the police concluded that 13-year-old Kwang, chasing a thrill, was messing around with this adult game alone at home, lost the plot, and accidentally choked out. Not suicide, not murder, nothing left to dig into. So they wrapped it up fast and called it done. This case is loaded with too many loose ends. When it hit the internet, people across China exploded into a raging debate online. Some backed the police, guessing Kwang might have picked up kinky ideas from his phone and felt the urge to copy them. Problem is, his family was dirt poor. His phone was not some modern smartphone, just a basic old model for calls and texts. No way to view videos or pictures. That theory collapses fast. Others noted the beam he hung from had multiple rope scratches, suggesting he had done this before. Maybe, but rural folks often hang dried meat up there to keep cats away, leaving similar marks. How do you tell? Those odd details raised eyebrows, but the real puzzles come down to 4 major points. First, the red dress. That dress and swimsuit Kwang wore were old discards from his cousin. His parents and neighbors all swore they had never seen him in women's clothes, not once. No pattern, no hint of girlish behavior, nothing feminine about him at all. So, pinning a cross-dressing label on him just because he died in a dress, that feels shaky. Second, the expert nods. This is the fiercest argument. His hands and feet were not just loosely roped. Each wrist and ankle was bound exactly 12 times, no more, no less, then tightened with actual loops through the middle, cinched rock hard. That is professional level tying, far beyond what a 13-year-old could manage. Third, the weight on his feet. Nobody can explain what that 2-pound weight was doing. His dad said the ground under Kwang's feet started flat, but later they found a small dent with urine in it. That shows he was alive when strung up, struggling enough for the weight to gouge the dirt, maybe losing control and wetting himself from shock. Fourth, the forehead pinhole. His body had no obvious injuries, but there was a tiny pinhole on his forehead beside a slight bruise. The bruise is no big deal, but that pinhole, pure oddity. Some say it is nonsense made up by nosy netizens, but I hunted down old interviews footage of Kwang's parents from years ago. His mom plainly said there was a pinhole on his head. Others argue she was unstable, not credible, but watching her talk about her son, her logic was clear and her grief was raw, like any mom who lost her kid. She might have been off in some social ways, but I would wager she knew her boy's condition better than anyone. All in all, Kwang's death is a twisted riddle wrapped in mystery. While everyone argued online, a theory popped up that sounds almost too perfect. The author calls it a textbook, evil Maoshan Taoist ritual, soul extraction for ghost raising. It demands the soul of a boy or girl under 15. On top of that, they say Kwang's body showed 3 fierce Taoism tricks: the soul drawing needle, the soul locking red garment, and the soul sinking weight. That pinhole on his forehead, from the needle soaked in corpus oil for 3 days and nights first. It is meant to spirit his 3 souls and 7 spirits after death, sometimes dubbed the spirit-splitting needle, making them easier to snatch. To keep the soul from slipping away during the grab, they used the red dress to trap it and the weight to hold it down. After taking the soul, you stash it in a place dripping with yin energy for 49 days, 7 times 7, until it becomes a vengeful ghost. What is yin? In Taoism, everything, our bodies, the universe, runs on two forces, yin and yang. Yin is cold, dark, shadowy side. Yang is hot, bright, lively side. They clash but balance each other out. Both need to work together to keep things steady. Like the moon is yin, the sun is yang. Women are yin, men are yang. Water is yin, fire is yang. That swimsuit Kwang wore stands for water and women's clothing, both heavy with yin, that cold, shadowy essence. Someone even calculated his death time from the coroner's report. He died at exactly 13 years and 13 days old. In Taoism, 13 is a number steeped in yin, tied to darkness and omens. The killer picked this yin-soaked day at a yin-charged moment, using yin-drenched tools to steal Kwang's yin-laden soul. Is that all just chance? Come on, really? This explanation kind of makes sense, I guess. Even though most people these days don't buy into that stuff, there are still plenty of superstitious beliefs hanging around in some less developed areas. Funny enough, it's often the really poor and the really rich who get into these things. Both groups reached a point where they feel like fate's calling the shots. The poor are so broke, they feel like they've got no choice but to believe in the fate. And the rich are so loaded, they're scared not to. That's why you see dabbling in stuff like curses, ghost worship, feng shui, that Asian Chinese thing where people arrange rooms and buildings to balance energy with nature, and other things that sound wild but somehow fit their logic. Plus, even with all the scientific progress we've made, there are still tons of unanswered questions. Those big shot physicists who've reached the top of their game, most of them end up believing some kind of higher power created the universe. There's just too much mind-blowing stuff we can't wrap our heads around. So I'm not gonna completely rule out the idea that Kwang Zhijun was killed by some messed up superstitious beliefs. But here's a kicker, even if it was superstition, someone had to actually do something. And if humans are behind it, that's straight up murder, no sugarcoating it. So if we analyze this based on the theory of Maoshan Taoism, the killer must have a few distinct traits. First, they would have to know Kwang's birth date down to the exact year and month. Second, they need to be very familiar with the old Kwang family house, like familiar enough to know there is a hidden back door. Third, they are probably at least 30 years old. And fourth, they'd have a deep grudge against the Kwang family, deep enough to go this far with such a sinister move. But here's the thing, Kwang's parents were honest, down-to-earth folks their whole lives. They never stepped on anyone's toes. So who could hate them this much? They racked their brains but couldn't figure it out. If they had to point a finger at anyone, there's only one person who might have had a bone to pick with them, Kwang's mom's ex-husband. Yep, you heard that right. Kwang's mom was married before. She had an ex-husband and even had a son with him. But they got divorced, and the older son was given to the ex-husband to raise. After the divorce, they pretty much stayed out of each other's way, and things were fine until 3 years ago. One day, out of nowhere, the ex-husband stormed over to the Kwang's family's place, furious, demanding that Kwang's parents hand over his older son. But that son wasn't even there. According to the villagers, the kid she had with the ex was a real troublemaker, always stirring up drama, not a good guy at all. Apparently, he'd run off somewhere and hadn't come home for days. But the ex-husband didn't care. He just barged in, made a huge scene, and things got pretty heated. In the end, he left with a harsh warning, saying, "A gentleman's revenge can wait 10 years. When the time comes, I'll make sure you're helpless with no one to hear your cries." After that, the whole thing just fizzled out. So could the ex-husband really have gone so far as to kill over something like that? The police actually brought him in for questioning. They didn't share much about it, but their conclusion was clear. He didn't have the means to pull it off, so they ruled him out as a suspect. If it's not the ex-husband, then who could it be? Kwang's mom said that 2 days before she found out her son was dead, she had a weird dream. In the dream, a man walked into his old family home through that hidden back door. She only saw his back. He was tall and broad, but she couldn't make out his face. She just remembered he was carrying a backpack and wearing a hat. Ever since that dream, she'd been on edge, worried sick about her son. She kept pushing her husband to go check on him, and that's why Kwang's dad rushed back to the old house. If that dream was real, could it have been Kwang sending his mom a message from beyond? But wait, it gets even stranger. A few days later, an 80-something-year-old grandma from the village told Kwang's dad that she'd actually seen a strange man a few days earlier, a guy with a backpack and a hat. She didn't see his face either. Is that just a wild coincidence? Thing is, no one has seen this mysterious guy since. After going around in circles, all the leads went cold. Kwang Zhijun's dad was just an ordinary migrant worker. He did everything he could to dig up the truth about his son's death. He begged the cops to reopen the case, but got shut down. He called out the school for clacking on their duties to watch over the students, but the school fired back, saying it was right in the middle of a swine flu outbreak. Over 30 kids were out sick, so they figured Kwang Zhijun was just another one playing hooky because of illness. The school didn't think they messed up big time. What could Kwang's father even say? A bizarre murder like this rocked the village, and everyone started treating them like they were cursed. People avoided them wherever they went. Not only did they have to grapple with the pain of losing their son, but they also had to deal with all the gossip and whispers swirling around them. Years later, Kwang's father passed away full of bitterness and regret, and his mother just vanished. No one knows where she went. Their old family home fell into ruin long ago. Over time, a bunch of thrill-seeking bloggers and explorers started poking around that abandoned house. There's really nothing left inside, but the creepy vibe still lingers, enough to give anyone chills down their spine.